Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang, currently sheltering in place in San Francisco. Markets rallying today on optimism. The president's top health advisors are working on medical criteria to reopen the economy. This as the World Health Organization is cautioning countries against lowering their guard. The lockdown has ended in Wuhan, the original epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. But here in the U.S., in the last 24 hours, 2,000 deaths, almost 2,000 deaths reported, and New York State just reported its highest daily death toll yet, 780 deaths there. We are standing by for the daily White House briefing to begin. The president has tweeted that will begin at 5:30 Eastern time, about a half hour from now. We will take you there when that starts. This as UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains in the ICU in a British hospital for the third day in a row. Still, the S&P, the Dow, and the NASDAQ all climbing today. I want to bring in Keith Parker now, UBS head of global equity strategy. Keith, one day is up, one day is down. There are so many unknowns. The only thing we seem to know for sure is these daily death counts, these daily case counts. What are the indicators that you're actually watching to determine what kind of day it's going to be?
Yeah, it's amazing the day-to-day swings and the volatility. But I think what we've seen since the lows is positive or some green shoots on the coronavirus and the spread. So some cases settling down in number of new cases settling down in the U.S. and Europe. We're watching also search interest in real time to see if there's any indication of that picking up, and we've seen that come down week over week. But that positive developments on the coronavirus has come against monetary policy that's just quite extraordinary, where the Fed's increase in balance sheet of near $1.5 trillion in just a month would have boosted valuations in our framework by quite a bit, and rate fall coming down. And that also third against a backdrop of a very underweight positioning where investors had sold through February and March in anticipation of, I would say, the uncertainty that you were pointing to, still unknowns about the impact on the economy and earnings, which we think are likely to be a headwind over the next 2 months.
Now, one of the things that you're also monitoring at UBS is traffic congestion around the world, and you've identified some interesting trends that may shed light on economic activity in various places around the world. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, we're monitoring global traffic congestion across major countries and cities, and if you look at it on a GDP-weighted basis, it's down about 65% relative to year-ago levels, just because so many countries have mobility restrictions in place, and so the response and the policy response to coronavirus has just been so extreme. So we're watching to see if and when we're seeing that start to improve and inflect up. Where in the U.S., we've seen global traffic 78% below last year's levels, and week over week it's been pretty flat. So new news there, but we're watching to see if there's any signs of those mobility restrictions being lifted and people starting to move around again.
Meantime, we're still getting new numbers. Johns Hopkins reporting that coronavirus cases around the world now passing 1.5 million. Something else that you have been watching is actually the number of coronavirus searches on the internet. What is that telling you?
Yeah, we put out a note today, and we've been tracking Google search trends across countries just as an indication of one, sentiment, and two, if folks are having symptoms and they're searching that on the internet. And we saw the huge rise in search interest precede new cases, and starting about 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we saw search interest start to level off, and it had come down over the last week a bit more than 12% globally. But the last 2 days, we did see a pickup quite a bit in search interest towards March highs. So doesn't seems to me to point to stabilization, but not yet and all clear.
Meantime, we're already beginning corporate earnings season. Curious what you're tracking, especially in terms of big tech earnings that we cover on our show. What are these numbers going to look like?
Yeah, we're trying to get a handle on that, and we tried to come up with a unique proprietary indicator where in these times of uncertainty, analysts tend to wait for information, wait for company guidance to adjust their estimates, whereas other analysts try to get in front of it and revise down. I think that's what's happening now. So we create an indicator of implied EPS changes based on those analysts that have actually revised estimates recently in the past week, 4 weeks. And what we've seen is that those implied EPS changes have been, or the average EPS change underneath the surface has been running, call it declines of 10 to 14% for the S&P versus per week versus kind of 2% downgrades for the index. For tech as a whole, revision trends has been in line to slightly better than the market, where that EPS momentum is not nearly as bad as, say, in industrials, banks, and pockets of consumer discretionary. But we're closely watching to see, given how tech is so important to the market and investors' portfolios, if there's any change or deterioration in that earnings momentum.
All right, Keith Parker of UBS, really interesting insights there. Thanks so much for sharing them with us. Coming up, we're going to take a deep dive on Tesla, the company now cutting executive salaries some 30% across the board and furloughing non-critical workers as the coronavirus pandemic keeps operations shut down at Tesla factories. We're also going to take you to the White House. That press conference is scheduled to begin about 20 minutes from now. We'll take you there when it starts. This is Bloomberg. Tesla furloughing all non-critical workers without pay and cutting executive salaries by as much as 30%. This, according to an internal memo that was seen by Bloomberg, because much of Tesla's production operations have been shut down. Tesla said in a statement to us that this is a shared sacrifice across the company that will allow us to progress during these challenging times. Joining us now to discuss, Dan Ives of Wedbush Securities, who covers Tesla. Dan, the Bay Area shelter-in-place order, which of course covers the Fremont factory here in my county, that's in place until May 3rd, but reopening on May 4th seems pretty optimistic right now, perhaps even unrealistic. What if it lasts longer than that for Tesla?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think right now investors are sort of baking in that it'll last through the end of May in terms of Fremont, just for starters. You know, and I think that's going to be a big focus in terms of the next quarter or two for Tesla as they try and navigate the shutdown, as well as just overall demand headwinds, as every company is seeing. But I think right now the street is sort of factoring in, at least until late May.
So, just how bad then is this going to be for Tesla? This is a company that is targeting delivering 500,000 cars this year. How much does your new estimate then change?
Yeah, I think you basically take about 100,000 off that. So I think right now the bogey is 4 to 415K from a delivery perspective. I mean, 2Q is going to be a trough quarter, especially not just from consumer demand in terms of the lockdown and what we're seeing, but even from a delivery perspective. The only bright spot is China, ironically, in terms of Giga 3 and what you're seeing there. But I'd say right now we're talking 4 to 415K is sort of the new line in the sand relative to the 500 plus. That was the original guidance.
So when they do reopen, how long does it take for production to ramp back up, or can that happen pretty quickly?
Yeah, just given its musk in Tesla, that could ramp back up pretty quickly. And I think, again, if you from a production perspective, that's not as much of a concern for the street, just because what we're seeing with Giga 3, as well as how quickly you could see Fremont ramp. The bigger question is just ultimately consumer demand, how long you're going to see that really be a headwind for Tesla. And ultimately, when you look on the other side of this dark valley, where does cash flow burn? And ultimately, where does the bad news trough out? And I think that's going to be in 2Q. I could tell you from a stock perspective, investors are looking through that on the other side of the dark valley in terms of how to value Tesla, even though there's some dark quarters ahead.
Dark alley is certainly one way to put it, Dan. Apple is stepping up to the plate meantime. They're making face shields for healthcare workers. Their manufacturers are working on ventilators. Curious what this means for iPhone production and what it means for Apple's quarter as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I think Cook and Apple, like many companies around the country, have, I sort of recognize their role in this, and obviously from a face mask and ventilator perspective, what you're seeing at Foxconn. From an iPhone perspective, we've taken numbers down about 15%. I think, you're going to continue to sort of see, from a demand perspective, just anemic type of numbers over the next quarter or two. And I think that's something investors are starting to factor in. And very similar to Tesla, what's on the other side? What's on the other side of the dark valley? What do valuations look like? What does the stress test numbers look like? The big question is also going to be the 5G phones. Do they release them in the fall like was anticipated? I continue to think that's closer to holiday season as it gets pushed out, as well as what we're seeing from the supply chain.
All right. Dana Ives, Wedbush Security, always good to have you here on the show. Thanks so much for stopping by today. Meantime, as cases around the world of the coronavirus surge past 1.5 million, scientists everywhere are racing for a cure. Earlier, I spoke with Serge Saxonov, the CEO of 10x Genomics, as well as Michelle Cortez, our Bloomberg News medical reporter. Let's take a listen to that conversation.
It has been absolutely unbelievable how fast the global pharmaceutical industry has worked to take on this coronavirus. I think that probably what we would see first is a therapeutic. There are trials already underway on experimental medicines that were in development before this even came about. And everybody's gone back through their pipeline of products to see if there's anything that's on the market available already that might be beneficial. So even in the next couple of months, we might see treatments should everything work beautifully. For vaccines, it's going to be at least a year. There's about 24 in development, and we're just going to have to wait and see.
Serge, would you echo that? In as little as 2 months, we could see treatment?
Yes, if we're repurposing existing drugs, that's something that could happen. And there's definitely a lot of work, a lot of clinical trials going on right now in parallel all around the world, trying to find those kinds of treatments to repurpose existing drugs. Developing new drugs will take longer. There's still some very promising approaches, especially ones that are based around making drugs using antibodies from patients that have recovered. Those are not going to happen immediately, but in several months, we could have potentially pretty effective therapeutics.
Talk to us a little bit more about how these antibodies treatments would work. I mean, we've heard about antibodies from COVID-19 in particular, folks using antibodies from SARS patients as well.
Yeah, I think, again, the science is still very preliminary at this point, although scientists and researchers around the world are racing really fast forward to understand all the pieces of this puzzle. I would say the most promising avenue would be to take antibodies from recovered COVID-19 patients, so not so much the SARS sort of classic disease patients, and use kind of peer into those into the blood generated by those patients to pick out the antibodies that they have generated that can bind the virus, and then kind of turn on the manufacturing to make those kind of drugs that are very similar to those antibodies to actually give as treatment or as prophylaxis to people against the COVID-19 virus.
Meantime, Michelle, let's talk a little bit more about a vaccine, which, we're talking 18 months potentially out. At the same time, we're seeing the lockdown and in Wuhan, but, almost 2,000 deaths in a single day in the United States. Given that, should lockdowns be ending? Should folks, even in China, feel comfortable leaving their houses?
The truth of the matter is we're not going to be protected against this virus until you have some kind of immunity built up, either individually or enough of it in the community that the virus isn't spreading. There's only two ways that we know to do that. That's to actually have the infection and come out of it, or to be immunized. So the alternative is literally staying in your house for 18 months until we have a vaccine.
Serge, you were shaking their head there when I talked about the lockdown in Wuhan ending. Do you think it's too soon? And how do we find this happy medium? Or is there a happy medium between now and 18 months from now?
Well, I guess I'll preface it by saying I'm not sure how much information we have actually coming out of China and how much of the information we can trust. So I think we should take all of that with a grain of salt. As far as I would echo Michelle's points around, ending lockdowns, I think it would be super dangerous to do that now. Obviously, we really need to get the case numbers way, way down from where they are right now, and we need to have massive testing in place before we can allow any kind of normalization or kind of starting to get back on the road to normalization.
So, Serge, 10x is working with scientists around the world and also scientists in China. Curious what you're seeing from your Chinese counterparts, and if you have any more indication of what the real numbers are like there, what the real situation is like there.
Yeah, it's hard for us to tell. We are selling. So what 10x does is provide tools, technologies, tools for scientists to understand biology, to kind of work out, and specifically for COVID, to understand how the virus actually infects humans, what is the immune response, how would different treatments potentially work, understand the severe cases versus mild cases, kind of what is going on with the biology. And so we sell our products to the scientists and researchers over there, and all the initial COVID research was happening in China, going back to January and February. And so there was a lot of science that was coming out with initial publications were all coming out of China, and they're finding things, and now there's much more of this kind of research around the world. It's hard for us to tell precisely, obviously, the case numbers or anything like that. We do know that there's a lot of research that's happening there and all around the world now.
So then what's your sort of best estimate about a return to normalcy, or at least being able to leave our houses? I mean, how far out is this really? If, treatments are still far out, vaccine is far out, and this whole idea of herd immunity is kind of unrealistic right now.
Yeah, so you have to be very careful right now. And it's, in many ways, it's anybody's guess. As I mentioned, I think you need to get the case numbers much further down than they currently are in the United States. And that's going to take, some number of weeks, quite potentially, maybe even months. And you need to have widespread testing. That's really, really important. You need to have widespread testing in place so that you can tell what is actually going on with the spread of the virus, so that you can prevent what's happening in New York happening again elsewhere. And so that's going to be kind of our life for the next at least several months. We're going to be monitoring things very carefully. We have to monitor the numbers, and we're going to, be looking at all the different outbreaks. And hopefully, in not too distant future, kind of medium term, several months, we will start seeing some of these therapeutics emerging to start addressing the epidemic.
Serge Saxonov there of 10x Genomics, as well as our own Michelle Cortez. Coming up, we're going to be talking about potentially fake masks, sales, finding a new audience on Instagram, and potentially thousands of phony accounts. Our Sarah Fryer will join us live. We're also going to take you to that press conference at the White House, scheduled to start about 10 minutes from now. We'll be right back. This is Bloomberg. Facebook has been struggling to contain misinformation about the coronavirus on its platforms, the Blue app, WhatsApp, and Instagram. The latest battle, Instagram accounts promising medical-grade face masks that could be fake. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer, who of course covers Instagram for us. Sarah, this is something that Amazon and eBay have been battling as well. How big a problem is this on Instagram?
We've seen thousands of accounts that are posting masks claiming that they'll be helpful to people, but they may not fit medical standards or may actually have harmful ingredients in them. And this is something that Facebook has tried to counter. Back in March, they banned advertisements for medical products because they were seeing a lot of price gouging, same as on Amazon and eBay. But it's really been difficult for them to clamp down on it, even though they say that this is their top priority right now.
So what is Facebook saying about this? It seems every day they're announcing some new initiative to crack down on misinformation. You know, they've not allowed forwarding of certain kinds of messaging on WhatsApp. But what are they doing about this Instagram problem?
Well, they have fewer people looking at this right now, and I think that this goes to the heart of the problem with Instagram's content moderation. Facebook hasn't given Instagram a lot of specific resources that it also applies to Facebook. So right now, everyone, as I explained in a Business Week piece this week, there is a central team at Facebook that handles these issues of so-called integrity. And Instagram doesn't have a specific team that works on these issues. And so they're sort of playing second fiddle to a lot of the Facebook priorities. And that means a lot of content that is especially image-based or meme-based can fall through the cracks, especially now when fewer contractors are able to go to work.
So the Business Week piece you're referring to is actually an excerpt from your forthcoming book called No Filter, which is about Instagram, in which you detail some of these, resource issues that Instagram is facing, and you tie it back to Mark Zuckerberg's own jealousy that he doesn't want Instagram to surpass Facebook, even announcing that Instagram had surpassed 1 billion users. What does that mean for Instagram's trajectory going forward?
So I think that as the company centralizes its work on the biggest problems, they're of course going to prioritize the problems that affect the most people. And Facebook still has a lot more people than Instagram does. So Instagram sometimes gets its problems pushed down to fourth or fifth or sixth priorities in the long list of things that Facebook needs to conquer. And that's not good for Instagram's users, who are, more engaged now than ever. We've seen a huge spike of activity on Instagram and Facebook, especially in places that are extremely difficult to monitor, like live video. And so, I think that we're just going to see this problem get harder, especially since the company doesn't have enough people working on it.
All right. Well, your new book, No Filter, is out next week. I highly recommend it. It is a riveting tale of the inside story of Instagram. Bloomberg Sarah Friar, thanks so much. Coming up, we're going to talk about another social media mogul, Jack Dorsey, committing $1 billion worth of his wealth to COVID relief. We'll dive into that next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. We will take you to the White House momentarily. The press conference there is scheduled to start any moment now. The Daily Virus Task Force will be looking for any indications on their plans to reopen the economy. The president's top health advisors had been working on medical criteria that might allow that to happen, though, of course, much discussion about whether this talk is still premature. Meantime, today, Senator Bernie Sanders dropped out of the presidential race, clearing the path for Vice President Joe Biden. Biden will have a tough time, though, breaking through in the middle of this pandemic. Much of his efforts will have to be online. Our own Kevin Cirilli caught up with DNC Chair Tom Perez to talk about the Democratic National Committee's plan going forward. Take a listen to that conversation.
Today is the beginning of the general election campaign, as far as I'm concerned, and we are working hard to make sure that we hand over to our nominee a really, really muscular infrastructure. That's what we've been working on for the last 2 years, and I'm confident and proud of the fact that we're going to hand over to the Vice President the most expansive campaign infrastructure the DNC has ever built for a non-incumbent presidential candidate in modern political history.
Chairman Perez, how does the pandemic influence your ability to create that infrastructure, especially when it comes to fundraising, for example?
Well, our tactics have changed, but our goals haven't. Yes, we do a lot more work digitally, and Kevin, over the last 3 weeks, we've trained literally 4,000 or 5,000 digital organizers. We've been in the digital space for some time, and so we'll continue to do this. We are continuing to raise money aggressively because we want to make sure that we can implement our battleground buildup. We've already gotten organizers and others in place in the key battleground states. And so, yes, we're not knocking on doors. There's no doubt about that. But we're actively ramping up our campaign battleground infrastructure because we know that we have 209 days till the election. And so we'll change our tactics, but we're not going to change our goals, which is to win up and down the ballot.
I was struck, Chairman Perez, I was struck by what you just said about not being able to knock on doors. I mean, even so, yesterday Wisconsin held a primary. As states decide to delay or to postpone their primaries, we get closer and closer to that June 9th deadline for delegate selection. And so are you considering changing your rules at all for states to have primaries post that deadline in order and that they'll get counted at the convention?
Our Rules and Bylaws Committee is already working carefully and closely with the states that have been forced by this pandemic to change their primary dates, and we'll continue to do that. And in the meantime, obviously, we're going to begin the process of working really closely with the Vice President so that the momentum that he's built through his impressive run all across, north, south, east, and west, he has incredibly broad appeal. And we will work with the states that haven't voted yet. We'll work with the states that have already voted, and we are going to build a remarkable general election infrastructure so that we can win not only the presidency, but we can win up and down the ballot.
When it comes to the convention, it's already been delayed to August. Is it realistic to think that an August convention, a normal convention, so to speak, could be at play? Or will you have to consider things like delegates voting virtually?
Well, I'm looking forward to August. We moved the convention 5 weeks back so that we can maximize the probability of success. I think that was a good move. It's been well received. And our goal is to make sure we put on a really impressive show in Milwaukee where we showcase our values. We will make sure we have safety as job one. We're not going to put our public health heads in the sand, unlike the other side. And at the same time, I'm confident that we can put on an exciting, muscular convention where we showcase our values, our nominee, and I look forward to, again, having the Vice President talk about his values, his commitment to everyday Americans as we move forward.
DNC chair there, Tom Perez. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner now, who covers Facebook and Twitter for us. Kurt, with Bernie dropping out of the race, he was an expert at breaking through online, and Joe Biden hasn't been as good at that. What does this mean for the campaign going forward in terms of their digital strategy as it pertains to ad dollars that will be spent on Facebook, Twitter, and elsewhere?
Well, I think it's going to be incredibly important. I mean, this was a huge storyline. If you remember, after 2016, there was a lot of kind of reviewing of how President Donald Trump used Facebook, for example, versus how Hillary Clinton used Facebook. And there was a pretty strong belief that President Trump did a much better job. Even today, I just went and looked. He has run 85 active advertising campaigns on Facebook today alone, whereas Joe Biden has 2 active campaigns that he's launched today. So even just the sheer kind of volume that we're seeing from President Trump versus Joe Biden is very drastically different. And I think that when you look at now that it's a 2-horse race, I think that Joe Biden and his team are probably going to have to be a lot more aggressive on social media than they've been thus far.
Interesting. And of course, we're seeing the president every day on national television where we're standing by for him to start speaking at the White House. Now, we've reported that he was already looking ahead. He bought the YouTube masthead on Election Day. And Joe Biden, at least through traditional channels, is going to have a tough time breaking through, what are sort of his options, across Facebook, across Twitter, to start doing things a little differently using the tools that they have to offer?
Well, I think one of the ways where he's really at a disadvantage here is just from what, they would in the industry call organic reach, right? I mean, you look at President Trump, he's got 27 million followers on Facebook. I think he's got close to 76 million followers on Twitter. Joe Biden has 1.7 million Facebook followers. That is 25 million fewer than Trump does. So just in terms of having the ability to say something that's going to reach a lot of people for free, he's at a tremendous disadvantage. So what I think he's going to ultimately have to do is take advantage of the kinds of features that these companies really prioritize. So right now, for example, on Facebook, that would be live video. There's a lot of live video being used. There's a lot of people who are using Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. Are there ways that he can kind of meet voters where they already are? I think that would probably be a strong strategy for him, given the fact that he's at such a disadvantage when it comes to just kind of that organic, natural platform.
Meantime, Kurt, Jack Dorsey, CEO of both Twitter and Square, committing to donate $1 billion to coronavirus relief. It is a huge number. It's coming in the form of Square equity. But what's also really interesting about it is he put up a Google document and said that we could all track when the money is coming in and where it is going to, and that this whole effort will be completely transparent. Tell us a little bit more about how this is actually going to work.
Yeah, it is a massive number, and it'll be something that takes months, probably even years, actually, to really play out when you think about the fact that he's going to be selling this stock, and it's something he's going to have to do over time. But the interesting element, as you pointed out, is the fact that people can kind of like follow this as it happens. So this Google Doc, in theory, is going to show all of the different grants and the stock sales that he makes, so that you can really hold him accountable for actually following through and doing what he said. What we don't know is where this money is ultimately going to go. I'm told that it's a global effort, so it won't just be here in the United States. But he also said in his tweet storm that after this COVID-19 relief effort is over, that he's going to start focusing on women's needs, and he's going to start focusing on universal basic income. So it doesn't necessarily mean all this money is going to go toward the coronavirus relief, but we should be able to see where it does go if he updates his Google Doc as he says that he will.
Right. He also talked about girls' education, where that money is sorely needed. Okay, Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, thanks so much for that update. Meantime, we've been getting some breaking headlines about Disney. Disney announcing that Disney Plus, their streaming service, which launched last year, has surpassed 50 million paid subscribers. Those subscribers sorely needed by Disney right now. Of course, they've had to close their theme parks around the world in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic. Disney Plus, meantime, has been rolling out in European countries as well as India, and of course here in the United States. Disney shares spiking after hours, up right now over 3%. Coming up, we're going to be talking about Uber. Uber Eats continuing to expand in the midst of a surge in demand during this stay-at-home period. We're also going to take you to the White House, standing by for that White House press conference, which was supposed to start about 10 minutes ago. They're a little late, but we will get you there as soon as it begins. This is Bloomberg. Uber is expanding a program that allows businesses to have food delivered to their employees' homes. This is a project that was launched in the U.S. last year, now expanding to a dozen or so other countries. Bloomberg's Mark Millian now joins me with the details. Of course, this is another part of the expansion of Uber Eats, which has seen a surge in demand, Mark, as a result of this quarantine period. Tell us a little bit more about how this program works.
Yeah, they started it as kind of a service to do office catering. They did, some testing of it last year, And then they realized that there was a huge demand for from a certain class of companies. They have some tech companies that are using it to send food to workers' homes as kind of a way to keep the free lunches going that a lot of these offices offer. And so they've seen a big uptick in usage from their test customers in the U.S. They said usage increased 28% in March, and now they're sensing this opportunity, and they're rolling out this service for companies to order food for their employees to 4 new countries starting today in Brazil, Canada, France, and the UK, and as you said, another dozen over the course of the year.
Now, do we know how much money Uber is actually making now off this surge in Uber Eats? I mean, they've been offering big discounts in the middle of this coronavirus period, also discounts and fees for restaurants to join. They're also dealing with driver issues. What do we know about how this is actually impacting their Uber Eats bottom line?
Not a whole lot, but we're very interested to see what they report in their quarterly earnings when those come up. As we are with many companies, this virus has changed the entire business and social landscape. For Uber, their main business is essentially operating a taxi service that very few people want to use now that everyone's staying home and trying to avoid contact with other people. And so their business has taken a substantial hit, as much as 70% ride declines in some of the hardest hit cities like Seattle. And so they have shifted a lot of their attention and a lot of their labor to the food delivery business, and they're hoping that that can make up for some of the shortfall in rides. And this, appealing to businesses is so far a small element, but one element of a larger strategy of getting more people to turn to Uber Eats to get their meals delivered in lieu of, taking rides out to restaurants or wherever else.
Has only donated $20 million. The United States actually is donating less.
Speaking at the White House briefing, you can continue to watch this at LiveGo on the Bloomberg terminal. We'll be back with more Bloomberg Television after this quick break.